A mutiny by suicide, the Mutukula Massacre, and Idi Amin's reign of terror, it is difficult, even today, to speak of the events at Mutukula without a shudder. The massacre that unfolded in the early months of 1972, barely a year after Idi Amin had seized power, represented the most grotesque and unvarnished brutality of his military dictatorship. Testimony like that of James Namakajo, journalist, intelligence officer, inmate and witness, burns into the memory, exposing not just the horror of that place, but the peculiar cruelty of Amin's Uganda. Mutukula, a sleepy border town between Uganda and Tanzania, became an unspeakable slaughterhouse. Inmates there were herded like cattle, starved, beaten and murdered, their bodies casually dumped into trenches they themselves were forced to dig. The violence was systematic, deliberate, a performance of terror engineered to destroy not just the body but the human spirit. Mutukula's horror was not an accident of war or a moment of madness. It was orchestrated. It reflected the chilling psychology of Amin's regime, where cruelty was a currency of power and where loyalty was demanded in the language of blood and fear. Trenches of death, in the account Namakajo gave to the Uganda Human Rights Commission chaired by Justice Arthur Oda, the prisoners, mostly soldiers and intelligence officers suspected of loyalty to the ousted President Milton Obote, were forced to dig trenches along the Uganda-Tanzania border. Officially, they were told these pits were for rubbish. But even the half-starved and exhausted prisoners began to piece together the truth. Every time new trenches were dug, people would disappear. In the beginning, senior officers were targeted, then junior officers, then the privates. Every morning the same cycle: dig, collapse from hunger, be threatened, and watch others dragged off to their deaths. Sometimes they heard gunfire, sometimes they heard nothing at all, for many were butchered with bayonets or beaten to death, with hammers to save bullets. It was as if the regime was experimenting with the cheapest methods of murder. Namakajo described collapsing from exhaustion and being mocked for hurrying his death. Digging your own grave was one thing, being taunted about it was another. But even more horrifying was what happened when prisoners tried to escape. One day, 20 men squatting in the prison compound, a short sprint from the Tanzanian border, saw their only chance. They broke for it, scrambling toward freedom. The guards opened fire immediately, killing many of them where they sat, then mowing down the runners. Even one man who made it into Tanzania was chased down in a car, shot, and his body brought back. Across the border, a grotesque trophy. From that moment, all pretense ended. Everyone knew what Mutukula had become. A death camp, a suicide mutiny, despair took hold. Some prisoners began hanging themselves from roof beams with their shirts. Indeed, first, the survivors tried to stop them, but eventually even that fight faded. Suicide became a mercy. Namakajo described men burying their heads in pit latrines to drown themselves, dead bodies hanging above, the living sleeping below. The division between life and death grew thin, blurred. They stopped resisting. Suicide was preferable to the hammer, the bullet, or the noose. Things deteriorated further when prisoners, refusing to come out to be killed, were locked into buildings without food. One group of 177 was starved for 5 days. During this period, a chilling order came from Kampala. If prisoners mutinied again, bomb them. Blowing up the prison, among the prisoners, was Simon Nsubuga, a singer known for his songs praising Obote. In the 1960s, he had become a cleaner in the officers' mess and overheard radio communications between the prison commandant and Kampala. Nsubuga warned his fellow inmates bombs were on the way. Indeed, explosives arrived the next day. In an act of desperate ingenuity, prisoners used spoons to dig through walls and escape into the night. 22 managed to flee into Tanzania, but many more were caught and gunned down. The following night, soldiers laid bombs around the building, holding the remaining prisoners, and detonated them. Only one man survived the blast, Hassan, a former director of CID. Dragged from the rubble, Hassan was a symbol of unwanted survival. He offered his watch and gold chain to the soldiers as final gifts. Instead, he was clubbed to death by a soldier who took offense, thinking the gesture an insult. The soldiers then hastily buried Hassan's body at the bottom of a mass grave containing more than 80 corpses. Hours later, an order came from Kampala. Idi Amin wanted Hassan's body delivered to him. It had to be dug out of the bloody pit. The irony was bitter. In life and in death, Hassan was a pawn. Idi Amin's culture of terror, the massacre at Mutukula, was not an isolated incident. It was part of Idi Amin's broader strategy: rule by terror. From the moment he seized power in January 1971, Amin sought to erase any possible opposition. The army, the police, the intelligence services, all were purged of those suspected of loyalty to Obote or of unreliability, often along ethnic lines. The Acholi and Langi, ethnic groups seen as Obote's base, were particularly targeted. As Namakajo recalled, there was systematic separation by ethnicity before killings. By late 1972, Amin's government had become a labyrinth of fear, paranoia, and brutal reprisals. Massacres like Mutukula were echoed in the mass graves of Jinja, Ambarara, and other parts of the country. Amin's State Research Bureau operated torture chambers across Uganda, turning the entire country into an open-air prison. Even those who managed to escape Mutukula, like some of the 22 who fled into Tanzania, found no safety. Many were killed during Amin's botched invasion of Tanzania later that year. Those who survived often joined resistance movements like NASA, National Army, for the salvation of Uganda, hardened and embittered by what they had witnessed. Memory. And reckoning it is important to recall Mutukula not just as a horror story, but as a warning. It shows how a state, once captured by a madman, can turn its machinery inward, treating its citizens as enemies to be crushed, not protected. It shows how violence can become routine, an administrative matter, a logistical challenge of digging enough graves, and it shows the human spirit's breaking point, when survival becomes an accident, not a right. For Uganda, the memory of Mutukula must remain alive. Justice for the victims may still be incomplete, but remembrance is a kind of resistance to forgetting. It is a refusal to allow monsters like Idi Amin to disappear into the fog of history without judgment. Namakajo's testimony is one among many, but it carries the weight of thousands of silent voices, those buried in the trenches of Mutukula, those who hung themselves, those who dug with spoons in the night. They must not be forgotten. As Uganda continues to rebuild, to move forward, the shadows of Mutukula remind us: peace is fragile. Freedom must be guarded, and the past, no matter how painful, must be remembered.